Previously on Pegasus Lounge.
80% sell-through rate items, 3 50% sell-through rate items, and 2 30% sell-through rate items just to get 20 per day. So you average a 50% sell-through rate going into your store.
Hey, what's going on, loungers? Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Mason T, and I am a 20+ year importer and product developer. So finally, we're getting back to our Wednesday schedule, right? And I just wanted to share with you guys that I came across a video here called Reselling Advice I Want to Scream from the Rooftops. Most sellers take years to learn this. It will solve most of your problems. And this is what she has learned after 9 years. So 9 years of reselling on eBay versus 20 years as a private labeler on eBay. And I really want you guys to hear what she has to say. It's basically 10 pieces of advice in this whole video. And I want to say that I literally disagree with all of them. Now, I'm just going to do one, which is number 7, okay? Because that one jumped out to me the most, that I really have to make a rebuttal video about. But if you guys would like to see the rebuttal to the other 9, then we'll do a video for that. So leave that in the comment below. So let's just jump into today's video, and I'm going to play for you exactly what she had to say about number 7.
Is sell-through rate is important even if you don't plan on being a high sell-through rate seller. Sell-through rate impacts a ton of things. At the very minimum, I would recommend that you have a sell-through rate of at least 50% or higher. Anything lower than that, and I think that you are getting to the point where those items probably aren't going to sell, and it's a scary place to be in.
Okay, so if you're very new to reselling, you might think she meant that, you know, having the collective amount of all the items in your store sell at a rate of 50% sell-through, right? But actually, this is about the STR calculation. Now, the way that resellers like to calculate the STR calculation, right, is that they set it up with the default, which is 90-day periods, okay, of how many sold versus how many are listed. But there's a lot of flaws in this. The first flaw is to even call it a sell-through rate because it makes it very confusing, because the default definition of what sell-through rate even means is basically a snapshot of what you did versus what you originally purchased. It's basically an inventory capture of a given time frame. But what they do is that they take how many sold in the 90 days and then divide it by how many are currently listed. These two numbers are completely decoupled from each other, especially in the way that they calculate stuff. So I've done videos on this before.
You'll see that there's 202 sold. So if I take 202 divided by 256, I think that's around 80%.
That means there's 89 sold. That's an extremely fast sell-through rate. What's that? 89 divided by 23, it's a 386% sell-through rate.
Has 57 listed and 169 sold for a sell-through rate of 296%.
Proving that this whole thing is just fuzzy math, is just weird, right? So I want you to hear that she wants you to pick up items that are basically around 50% sell-through rate. So what that means is that, like, okay, if in 90 days, 50 has sold and there are 100 listed, then that is a sell-through rate of 50%. How you get that number? I'm glad you asked. Okay, so you take the 50 and then you divide it by the 100 and then you multiply it back by 100. So you go from 0.5 back to 50, and that's how you get your 50%. Never mind the fact that these sold items used to be listings within the same 90-day period. So what you were supposed to do was to add how many are listed and how many were sold, and then divide it by how many are sold in order to get your actual STR that actually makes sense if you are trying to perform an aggregate calculation. But again, these two numbers have nothing to do with each other. When you think about what the STR method even is, it's just a roundabout way to judge whether or not you should pick up an item with its likelihood to sell. However, every single item out there, you don't know a lot of the information that's missing from this, okay? And one of the main things that's missing from this is about to come up in a second. So I want you to hear what she has to say.
Because you're spending money on inventory, but the items likely aren't going to move. So 50% or higher is a minimum of what I would say for sell-through rate. If you're somebody who does style-based sourcing, you can't really rely on sell-through rate so much. You need to rely on some other things, like making sure you're picking up only the top trending things and not all of these micro trends, which may or may not be popular in a month. But sell-through rate is extremely important, and it's even important when it comes to style-based sourcing, because let's say you pick up an unbranded crochet cardigan. Well, where do you even know how to price that item? You're going to want to look at solds in your own store, but if you don't have those, you're going to need to still rely on solds on eBay, Poshmark, or whatever platform that you are selling on.
That's a little bit weird, right? Because it's like, if you've sold it in your store before, then you would know how to price it. But if you had never sold it in your store, then you wouldn't know how to price it. So that piece of, just that sentence was odd.
Sell-through rate also affects pricing. So if something has an extremely low sell-through rate, you're not going to want to price it at what everybody else is. You're going to need to give your buyer a competitive edge in order to get that item to sell. And so sell-through rate is extremely important, even if you don't plan on being a high sell-through rate seller. If you think you don't need to know how to do it, I promise you that you do. It is a very important strategy and a very important tool that you can use when making decisions. So if you don't know how to already, definitely check sell-through rate. I've got a couple of videos on how to do it. It is super easy. The hardest part, and the one that I think takes a while to build and to learn, is just, what do I search? How do I search correctly so that I'm getting a true sell-through rate?
Either way, the calculation is wrong, because what it doesn't account for is the medium, the mean, and the mode of stuff, right? Because when you do this, you really need to go through every single one of the competitors, and it's kind of not worth your time to do that in reselling, because a lot of people are just single sale, one-off sellers. But the problem is this. Suppose you go and compare the prices, right? And maybe you even have an AI tool to scan this for you. So suppose the average price of this item you think is somewhere around $30, because somebody has it listed for $19.99 and then somebody else has it listed for $50. But it throws off the average because the mode is not what you think it is, and the mode is the most common price. So if most people are actually selling this at $22, which is the more frequent occurrence, and just a couple of people, have it priced wrong at like, $48, $55 or something like that. So what are you supposed to actually work with? That's the problem when it comes to doing these roundabout STR calculations. The reason why people have analysis paralysis in this, because you are lacking meaningful data when you are trying to perform stuff like this, okay? But let's talk about exactly what it means to have, a whole bunch of 50% STR items in your store. Like, exactly what is that even supposed to look like? So for today's lesson, I want to cover something that is not talked about enough by all of the creators on YouTube when it comes to reselling, which is about the rollover issue, right? Because it's so easy to say, hey, I have a store STR of how much percent, but what happens when you run the simulation of month to month to month? Then things start to get kind of funky. So when you think about, okay, for the sake of simple math, let's say our store is going to start with 100 items and we need a store STR of 50%, or the item STR of generally 50%. Well, what would that look like for the first month? Well, the first month is going to be a very simple calculation, because I have a chart over here that says, 100 new items, right? And then if it's a 50% STR of all the items collectively, or for the store, whatever, then it means that half is going to be sold. So 50% items sold, and then 50 items will carry over to the next month. But the question is, what happens into month 2 and into month 3? This is the stuff that is not talked about, and I feel as if it's very gaslighty in this space, right? Because if we don't cover this, then what is expected to come? So I've created quite a few scenarios here, okay? So basically we have scenario A and B, version 1 and version 2. So in scenario A and B version 1, okay, we are going to always replenish the store back to 100 units, right? And then in scenario A and B number 2, we're going to replenish exactly 100 units every single time, because that's our static number. So if we source the 100 units the first month, we're going to do 100 units the next month and the next month and the next month over, because that's what we're comfortable with. That's what we're capable of, right? So it's totally plausible to do something like that. Now, also, I want to define item potency here, okay? Because what you're talking about is either potency within the store or potency of the item. And there are two different things, because if you source stuff at 50% STR, like whatever that's supposed to mean, meaning that it has a chance of 50-50 selling, look, when you say things like that, okay, and then say, hey, you need a 50% sell-through rate, then at the same side of that coin, on the flip side of that coin, you are also accepting a 50% failure rate. So you have to see it from both sides, and that's how you really spot the grift, okay? So let's define exactly high potency of items first, okay? Basically, the definition is that the inherent demand and likelihood of a specific item selling quickly. So either it sells very quickly, so it's a high potency item, or it's a low potency item and it sells slowly and generally ties up your capital in the goods. Okay, so when we come back and we look at the management scenarios, okay, so either the items is what we're going to be focused on, that we're constantly sourcing in items at 50% potency rating, or we're trying to hit the goal of a store sell-through rate of 50% potency, one or the other, right? So let's start off with scenario A over here. So basically in scenario A1, we are always going to be replenishing back to 100, right? So in the first month, if we sold half, then we have 50 units left over. So this is exactly what it would look like, right? Initial inventory 100, items sold 50, and then roll over 50 units. But what happens into month 2? Well, we're going to start off with 50 and then source this month 50 so that we have a total inventory of 100. But let's talk about what happens when the item that rolls over the month afterwards. What is the potency then? It has to decrease somehow. So some people will argue, it's probably got like a 10%. Some people might say wishful thinking 30%. So let's meet somewhere in the middle and then just say 20% potency here, right? And some people might even argue that is a little bit too high. So if there's a 20% potency here at 50 items, that means 10 out of the 50 items will sell. That's 20%. So on the rollover items, we sell 10. And then the newly sourced 50 items, if they maintain 50% STR potency, then that would just be 25 units. So 10 units plus 25 units, that's 35 sales. So in 35 sales, what happens here? We sold 35 out of the 100. Now you only have a store STR of 35%. And so when we look at the rollover, right? If we only restored 100 in month 2, then here we go. You have 10 rollover items sold, 25 new items sold, and then 65 remaining that's going to roll over into the next month. Okay, so let's suppose we go into scenario B, right? So in scenario B, we're just going to source the static number of 100 units. I don't care what happened the month before. We're just going to go get 100 new units, right? So in that 100 new units, we still have the 50 that carried over from the month before. So that gives us a starting inventory in the month of 150 units. So again, the rollover is still going to be the same, right? So the rollover sold is the same. So that's going to be 10 units. And then we sold half of the new stuff, maintaining the same 50% STR. So that's 60 units sold for the month. Okay, so 60 units sold for the month to our initial 150. What is the store STR now? It's at 40%. It's still at a decline. And the worst part is that when we come back to look at exactly what the rollover is going to be, right? As 60 units sold with 150 starting over, in the beginning, then the remaining inventory is going to be 90 units rolled over into month 3. This is pretty scary. You see what I'm saying? Okay, now let's suppose we're going to try to hit the target of store STR. That way, we are burning through the products and then we're taking care of this rollover, right? So in scenario A2, it would look like this, okay? So we had the 50 units that rolled over from the first month, and then we're going to replenish 50 units, making it back to 100, right? And then from here, we have to sell a target of 50 units. All right. So the problem now is what? Is that, again, the rollover items of the 50 units that sell at a 20% potency, that's going to give us 10. So how do we make up for the other 40 units to make 50 units total? Well, we're going to need 40 units out of the freshly sourced items. So if the freshly sourced items sell 40 out of 50, what is the STR potency of those items? It's an 80% potency now. That is a pretty unrealistic ask, right? So in order to hit our target 50% sell-through rate for the store, every single month as we roll over, the demand of the item needs to be increasingly higher. Okay, so you can see from over here, like, 10 items sold, rolled over, right? 40 items have to sell, and that is 80%. If we move on and then we say we're going to source a static number of 100, then again, we had 50 that rolled over from the first month, and then we added another freshly sourced 100 units, giving us 150 units to start off with. Well, half STR for the target goal of the store would be 75 units. Again, if we only sold the first 10 units because of the 20% potency left over from the rolled over goods, then how many units do we have to sell of the new stuff? We would need to move 65 items out of the next 100 in order to make 75 sales total. You see what I'm saying? So 65 out of the 100 sold. Now we need a STR potency of 65% for the new items. You see how, like, this whole thing doesn't work in all four scenarios? So I just wanted to say that if you understood today's class about monthly rollover items, then please leave a comment down below and gold star for you. But if you didn't fully get it, no worries. Leave your questions in the comments and I'll address it. And if you're one of the people who did understand, then do me a favor and jump in and help those who are still working through it. That way, everybody levels up together. Here's the thing about sourcing items. A lot of people get caught up in the numbers and percentages like STR 50% or whatever they're claiming online. But let's be honest, common sense tells us that nobody goes out to source something they don't think will sell. You'll always pick up what you believe will move. So the real question is, what is the correct approach? Stop obsessing over exact percentages and start being a professional about it. Give each item a clear window, say 60 days or so on eBay. If it hasn't sold in that time, then you move it through a framework. First, cross-list it on other platforms and using a tool like Nifty. No sense in cross-listing an item that might move instantly on eBay. So only if it doesn't sell, start discounting it down to the point where shipping still makes sense. If the price gets too low, then consider bundling it with similar items to return the value. If bundling doesn't work, then take it to a local sales channel like a flea market where shipping is not eating the cost. So, only after working through the framework should you start thinking about discarding an item. The point is not just to move dead stock, but it's to learn. Keep a record of what sells and what doesn't. And over time, you're going to build a journal that teaches you what works and what fails. And that's how you grow as a professional seller.